How's everybody doing? Enjoying your summer? Yeah? It's beautiful yesterday. Anybody, you guys get a chance to get out, enjoy yourselves? We did. Like a 20-mile bike ride. It was awesome. So if I don't sit much during this sermon, you might understand why. Anyway, I want to welcome you. Thanks for coming this morning. Those of you that are joining us online, thank you for checking in with us. We're continuing our series we started 2 weeks ago on shame. And so I believe that this morning's sermon has the opportunity to really impact some of us this morning. I know even just working on it myself, studying it, it's really kind of hit me. And so I believe that we're going to walk out of here today with a different perspective, ultimately, of who Jesus is. I want to tell you a story before I jump into this about a lady by the name of Justine Sacco. Anybody ever heard of her before or remember her? She became really famous. 30 years old, she was the senior director of a corporate communications for IAC, and she began tweeting little jokes while she traveled about the indignities of travel. Anybody ever traveled before and kind of like, gosh, I don't enjoy this, right? And I think most of us. There was one about a fellow passenger on her flight from JFK. She put this, "Weird German dude, you're in first class, it's 2014, get some deodorant," in her monologue, "As I inhale BO, thank God for pharmaceuticals." Okay? Then during her layover at Heathrow, she put, Heathrow's in London, "Chili, cucumber sandwiches, bad teeth, back in London." Okay, so she's a real funny person, right? And on December 20th, before the final leg of her trip to Cape Town, South Africa, she put this, "Going to Africa, hope I don't get AIDS. Just kidding, I'm white." She chuckled to herself. She pressed send one last time, then kind of wandered around the airport for about a half hour, opened up her phone to see if she got any response, which she didn't because she only had like 170 followers. Got on the plane to South Africa, went to sleep. 11 hours was what it took her to fly from London to South Africa. When she landed in South Africa, her phone started to explode, as would be imagined. She started getting messages from people that she hadn't talked to in a long, long time. One girl from high school, she can't remember even talking to her after high school, sent her a message, "I'm so sorry for what's happening to you." Her best friend tweets her or messages her and says, "Please call me as soon as you get this. I can't believe what's going on." From that 11-hour flight, her tweet was shared and reshared and reshared until she became actually the #1 trending thing on Twitter that day. In fact, they started a hashtag "Has Justine landed yet?" Because everybody understood that when she landed, she was about to find out what her fate was, and she deserved it. Her job informed her that she was no longer employed there. She had an inbox flooded with hate and online shaming statements. When she arrived at her family in South Africa, where she was going, her family were actually like social activists. So when she got to the door, they informed her she was not welcome to stay with them. She had to leave because of what she had tweeted. She became a joke, and literally in one click, her life and her career was ruined. She experienced the full force of online shaming. Shame comes in a lot of different ways, all right? She experienced this online shaming, which is a brand new phenomenon that most of us have never experienced before. But shame, this is what was said about shame. Shame is getting laid off and having to tell my pregnant wife, right? Shame is having someone ask me when I'm due, but I'm not pregnant. Shame is hiding the fact that I'm in recovery. Shame is raging at my kids. Shame is bankruptcy. Shame is my boss calling me an idiot in front of the client. Shame is not making partners. Shame is my husband leaving me for my next door neighbor. Shame is my wife asking me for a divorce and telling me she wants children, but not with me. Shame is my DWI. Shame is infertility. Shame is telling my fiance that my dad is in another country when honestly he's in prison. Shame is internet porn. Shame is flunking out of school. Shame is hearing my parents fight through the walls and wondering if I'm the only one that feels this afraid. Then there's a darker side of the shame. It's the shame we feel of what's been done to us. When someone is the victim, and rather putting that shame back on the perpetrator, they internalize that shame themselves. Shame is being physically abused or sexually abused. Shame is being raped. Shame is being bullied. 2 weeks ago, we started this series on shame. And when we talked about shame, we kind of established this. We all have it. We're all afraid to talk about it. And the less we talk about it, the more control it seems to have over our lives. We also learned that there's a huge difference between guilt and shame. Shame is saying that, or guilt is saying, I did bad. But shame is saying, I am bad. And we learn that being unashamed is how God meant for us to be, that we were never created as humans for shame, which is hard for me to understand because it seems like that's been the weapon of choice for churches for generations. Is if your behavior modification doesn't line up to the standards that we say you should live at, then we shame you for it, which is so far removed from what God intended. Shame entered the picture. The truth is, when sin entered the picture, and it tied us up with all this sin and emotion. Before sin came into the picture, this idea of Adam and Eve naked in the garden, there was no shame with that. In fact, and it isn't about just not having clothes on. It was this uninterrupted, this open relationship between God and between one another where there was nothing in between that. It's just a completely open relationship. No insecurities, no struggles. To me, it's the coolest part of heaven. It's not just going to heaven, but it's like being able to love and be fully loved with nothing in between that. All my insecurities are gone at that moment. Like, can you imagine that for a second? Like to be able to have conversation with somebody with no insecurity in that conversation. No need to hide. Just being able to be free and open and known. To me, like it's almost unimaginable, and that's the amazing part of what heaven will be like. And then we talked about what is the antidote for shame. We said that shame is kind of coming out into the open with whatever it is that we feel ashamed about. First, with God. Just coming clean with God and saying, God, this is my stuff. This is my mistakes. These are the things where I've fallen short. And then strategically with other people in our lives. Now, I wouldn't tell you to do this with everybody you meet. But there has to be some people in your life that you can find and say, let me show you my stuff. Let me share with you my struggle. It's in that openness that we receive grace and healing and restoration and support. See, but the struggle with all of this, church, is we just don't do vulnerable well, right? Vulnerability is not something that most of us get excited about. In fact, the definition from vulnerable in the Latin means able to be wounded. How many are like, sign me up for that? That sounds awesome. Right? But without vulnerability, we'll never come out into the open. Without this sense of coming clean and stepping into the places that scare us and where the shame has hurt us the deepest, we don't have this opportunity to experience this restoration that we're talking about. Brene Brown, and that's some of the subject matter we've been using for this as part of her research, she asked people to answer the question, vulnerability is fill in the blank. Here's some of the things they put. Is sharing an unpopular opinion. Is standing up for myself, is asking for help, is saying no, is initiating sex with my wife or my husband, is calling a friend whose child just died, it's the first date after my divorce, is saying I love you first and not knowing I will hear it back. Vulnerability is getting fired. It's waiting for the biopsy to come back. It's exercising in public when I don't know what I'm doing and I'm out of shape. It's admitting I'm afraid and asking for forgiveness. Most of us, we think of vulnerability as a weakness, but do the things I just talked about sound weak to you? They sound to me like they take a lot of strength and a lot of courage to actually do those things. Yet too often we relate vulnerability to something as a weakness when really it takes strength to be vulnerable there. And Brown research, like others, one word that kind of keeps coming up with vulnerability is this idea of nakedness. And when we look for a biblical perspective, before shame entered the world, naked was fine. It was vulnerability that resulted because of sin and shame. Right? It wasn't something bad at that time. So here's the question I think we all have to ask ourselves. We have to come to grips with this. Is God safe with our shame or not? Is he safe with it? I believe it's a very important question. And most of us, if we're honest, we would say, I wish he was, or I hope he is. But I'm not sure if we're 100% honest we would say, yeah, he's 100% safe with my shame. If God is really safe, then what would I actually have to be ashamed about in my life? Why would I ever feel like I need to hide if I really believed God was safe with my shame? I want us to look at how God responds to somebody when they come to him vulnerable with all of their shame. I want to see in Scripture how he turns back to somebody. In this story, it's about Jesus, who, according to the Bible, is God in the flesh. So the truth is, when you look at Jesus, you are looking at God, right? Anybody like you read the Bible, like you read the Old Testament, and you read the New, and like in the Old, God kind of comes off as that like angry dad, right? Kind of hard to please. And then Jesus is just like the nice parent, right? I want you to understand something. When you're looking at the Old Testament, you're looking at thousands of years. And when you look at the New Testament, especially Jesus, you're looking at about 30 years, right? Do you understand God's grace and his compassion is always the same? It didn't change when it got to Jesus and get really nice, and then back here in the Old Testament, God's like this angry person. You're just looking at thousands of years of God reaching out to his people saying, come to me. Come on, I'm trying to restore you. I'm trying to bring you back into relationship. We just see a bigger picture, okay? So when you look at Jesus, you're looking at God. So this morning, we're going to take a look at how Jesus responds to somebody in their shame. Mark chapter 5, verses 21 through 28. And I'm going to be reading from the New Living Translation. I think it's just an easier way to understand. I know you might have different versions that you prefer, and that's totally fine. Study the Bible with whatever. I don't care what version you read, just read it, right? That's cool. But I want to read from that this morning, and it's going to be up on the screen. It says, Jesus got into the boat again, and he went back to the other side of the lake, and where a large crowd gathered around him on the shore. Then a leader of the local synagogue, whose name was Jairus, arrived, and when he saw Jesus, he fell at his feet, pleading fervently with him. He said, my little daughter is dying. He said, please come and lay your hands on her, heal her so she can live. So Jesus went with him, and all the people followed, crowding around him. A woman in the crowd who had suffered for 12 years with constant bleeding. She had suffered a great deal from many doctors, and over the years she had spent everything she had to pay them. But she'd gotten no better. In fact, she had gotten worse. She had heard about Jesus, so she came up behind him through the crowd and touched his robe, for she thought to herself, if I can just touch his robe, I will be healed. I want to pause there for a minute. Because I don't want us to miss this. This is a sad story. This is a woman that essentially she is plagued with an endless menstrual cycle. Christine and Kane, in her book, Unashamed, she gives us in a perspective, because here's what I believe. I believe we'll read a story like this and we're like, oh, that's cool. But I don't think we understand the weight of what this woman goes through, because we don't live in ancient Palestine. So this morning I want to explain to you what she would have actually went through with this struggle that she had. At this time, there are certain Jewish laws, okay? And they're in place to protect people and encourage physical health and hygiene. Unfortunately, they were also used to judge at that time and condemn people as well. According to the law, a woman's monthly cycle would make her ceremonially unclean for 7 days, beginning on the first day of her cycle. So anywhere she sat, anywhere she laid down, that place itself would then become unclean. So if you sat in the same chair, you would be considered unclean. So they were isolated. They were put into isolation so as not to shut down other people's lives. So according to the law, she was a risk to everyone around her. And so in that day, a woman had to wait another day after her cycle had completely ended, and then she would be considered clean after she had presented 2 turtle doves to the priest, who would make a sacrifice and deem her clean. All right? Some of you are like, man, I'm so thankful we live in this world today. Now think about this woman in this story for a minute. She never reached the final day of her cycle. She just never stopped bleeding. She never ended the time of being unclean. She never had a chance to actually make it to the priest. Day after day, month after month, year after year, this was an ongoing state that she struggled with, having to live a shame life. And then there's more. In these days, women, they didn't have their own homes. They lived usually in a home with generations around them. And part of what would give you, that you didn't have your own private space, you didn't have your own place to belong. You kind of lived amongst family and community and fellowship together. And part of what would give you a sense of belonging, a sense of well-being, is that the women early in the morning, they would get up and they would start to make dinner for the family and they would start to work together. And that's how you kind of felt like you belonged, how you felt like you were a part of the family. This woman would have never experienced that. It would not have been safe for her to be around everybody else. She would have been left outside. And then think about this for a minute, how physically weak she had been from the daily loss of blood. The smell that would have surrounded her, the constant changing and washing and isolation. There were no modern conveniences for cleanliness either, no indoor shower, no private washing machines, no feminine products. Her condition defined every second of every moment of every day of her life. It's no wonder she exhausted everything she had to get better. And the story says it didn't get any better. Now she's penniless and she's in worse shape when she started. And in this moment, she hears about some guy named Jesus who he's doing some things, like he's making waves, because stories are following him around that he's going around and he prays for people, or he lays hands on people and blind eyes open up and deaf ears open, lame are walking, even the dead are coming back to life. She hears this story and she says, if I can get to him, my life would be different. If I could get to him. Then I'm sure there were moments when she had to ask herself, how could I go in public? So you understand that any person she would touch, any person she would bump up against, would themselves then become unclean. How would God ever respond to me if I were to go pursue him in a selfish reason, corrupting everybody around me? And if she was exposed, her shame would be greater than it already was. But you have to believe that she was desperate, and I think even beyond desperate. So she comes up with a plan, and we can only guess the details. I wonder if she kind of hid her face, wrapped herself up, tried to disguise herself so nobody could recognize her, probably covered herself. She slips away from her home, trying to hide amongst the crowd, and most likely she's filled with anxiety. I mean, how can I expect God to do anything for me as I make everyone around me unclean? And I wonder if she was thinking the whole way, why do I even bother? Like he's going to want me, like he's going to do something for me. I'm sinning left and right, making this self-serving kind of effort, but at that point, she had nothing to lose. And as she kept thinking, if only I can touch his robe. And the Bible says that she did. She got there, she got through the crowd, she found Jesus, and in unbelievable faith, she touched his robe. This is what happens next. In Mark 5, verse 29, it tells us, and immediately the bleeding stopped, and she could feel in her body that she had been healed of her terrible condition. Immediately she receives the healing that she was looking for. Can you imagine, like instantly liberated from this struggle that you've wrestled with your entire life? I bet she had a hard time containing herself, right? Because it's finally over, it's finally done. She felt something on the inside of her that told her she was healed, that she was whole again. I bet she was filled with joy like she never experienced before. And just as she turns to walk away ecstatic that she doesn't have to carry this with her, her worst nightmare comes true. In verse 30, here's what happens. Jesus realized at once that healing power had gone out from him, so he turned around in the crowd and asked, "Who touched my robe?" His disciples said to him, "Look at this crowd pressing around you. How can you ask, 'Who touched me?'" But he kept on looking around to see who had done it. She'd been caught. This wasn't going to be a quick, touch and run. He caught her. And there's something a little deeper here. See, because when it says, "Who touched my robe," it wasn't just she pulled on his robe. In those days, Jesus was a rabbi, right? He was a Jewish man, okay? So he wore the traditional prayer shawl, the shawl that you see rabbis wear, the blue with the white stripes. And on the corner of every prayer shawl is a tassel, okay? And it hangs low. Really what she had grabbed was she grabbed the fringe. She grabbed a piece of that tassel. Now this is so super significant. So they had these fringes, and that a blue cord would hang from it, and only immediate family would ever touch the fringe of a man's robe. For someone other than a wife, a parent, a son, or daughter to touch that would have been culturally scandalous. So now Jesus is turning around and going, who just touched my robe? Who touched me? Who just violated everything culturally? Who just did that? As you could imagine, the crowd, like they would have just shut up. What do you mean, who touched you? It wasn't me. I didn't do it. Not only is this woman about to be disgraced and potentially revealed for her condition, she would bring dishonor to herself, her family, and everyone she had made unclean. So here is this potential for absolute public humiliation in front of Jesus and this massive crowd. So what would you do? Would you turn and try to run? Would you try to hide? Would you just get out of there as fast as you can? But here's the truth, church. If you want to find love and healing and acceptance, you've got to come clean. You can't stay in hiding. The more you stay in hiding, the more the enemy uses that to keep you locked up. So it takes strength to step into vulnerability. It takes strength to have that uninterrupted relationship with God, and He intended for us to have. And so this is what happens next. In Mark 5:33, it says this. The story is so good. And it's my hope today, you will never hear this story again the same way. And you will never see Jesus the way you did before. It says this, and then the frightened woman, trembling at the realization of what had happened to her, came and fell on her knees in front of him and told him what she had done. Told him everything. Just laid it all out there. The whole story. Right? And now, she chose to expose herself. She came forward and said, I touched your robe. And that's not all. Let me tell you why I touched it. She could have hidden. She could have just kept living her life in darkness. And just a side note, whenever God asks a question, understand He's not asking for that information because He already knows it. If God ever asks you a question, it's not because He doesn't know the answer. He's trying to draw you out. He's trying to draw you to be open, to come clean. When God asked Adam and Eve, where are you in the Garden of Eden after they ate the fruit and they revealed themselves that they were naked, He wasn't asking because He didn't know. He was asking because He wanted them to come clean with where they're at. Because unless we reveal it, God can't heal it. Right? And so He asked that when He asked the question. But she risked everything in that moment to move toward Jesus instead of away from Him, and realize in that moment everything she had was on the line. She could absolutely be exposed. She could be punished for what she subjected everybody around her to. And how did Jesus respond to a human being who became completely vulnerable in front of Him with all of their stuff? This is probably the most powerful verse in this entire story, and it's in verse 34. And He said to her, daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace. Your suffering is over. Let that soak for just a minute. Daughter, your faith made you well. Go in peace because your suffering is over. Why did He call her daughter? Who could ever touch the fringe of a man's garment? Only family. Right? Only family. Anybody else, it's scandalous. But if family touched that, it wasn't. Anybody who's watching this right now, let's just clarify something. That's my daughter. Do you see what Jesus just did? She comes to Him completely vulnerable, completely open, and He goes, daughter, she belongs to me. That one word, Jesus removes any blame or shame from her act. He takes it all away. No longer this person that is unclean. You're now my beloved child. Not only are you accepted, but now you are intimately connected to me. Touch my robe anytime you want. Anytime you need to, you can touch my robe. Because you're a part of me. You're not just healed. Now I'm giving you a brand new identity. But now you have so much more worth and infinite value than you ever had before. Do you see how Jesus responded to her? You're welcome here. You belong with me. I know you've got mistakes. I know you've suffered for a long time. I know what society says we should do with somebody like you, but you belong to me now. You're healed and you're part of my family. So what does this story have to do with us? How many understand there's many ways to bleed? There are many different ways to bleed. There are many ways to carry our shame. There's a lot of people in this room. You are bleeding. Everyone bleeds with shame somewhere. Do you want to hear what Jesus' words to you? Do you want to experience the covering of your shame and all the healing that comes with it? Do you want to hear Jesus say, son, go in peace. Your suffering is over. Daughter, go in peace. Your suffering is over. See, those of us bleeding this morning, we all have shame, and nothing we have done has healed it. No passing of time, no conversations, no rituals. Nothing we've done has ever made it better. Whether our shame was forced on us by something or someone else did, or the things that we did ourselves, we have wounds that bleed. Every day we feel this, and we feel sometimes so unclean. So what can we do? We can do exactly what she did. We can step into vulnerability, and we can touch the robe of Jesus, and we can lay it all at his feet. That's the invitation that every one of us gets offered to us this morning, is to touch the robe of Jesus, to step into our vulnerability, to lay it at his feet, and watch how he responds back to us. The reason why shame is so powerful, it keeps you in hiding, and it keeps you away from the one who can actually heal you. Its purpose is to draw you away from him. When the truth is, when you get close to him, you can finally be restored. That's who Jesus is. I said this a little bit earlier, and I will say it again. Church, what we don't reveal can't be healed. Your secret shame, your secret sin, that secret thing inside of you that you keep hidden so deep, that same thing the devil says, if anybody ever heard that about you or knew this about you, what would they think about you? It's the thing that keeps you in bondage. It's why you need to come clean to God and say, God, here I am. This is my mess. This is my mistake. And watch him respond to you. Son, daughter, go. You are healed and your suffering is over. I'll take that. He died a horrible death to take every bit of that mess. Next week, that's what we're going to talk about. We will talk about the shame of Jesus and how he took all of our shame. He was shamed beyond we could even imagine so that we didn't have to be. And if we touch his robe, like in that story, we are asking for his healing. We are asking for forgiveness. We are asking for relationship. And the answer is always the same. Son, daughter, your suffering is over. This is for anyone and everyone. No matter your story and no matter what brings you shame. I'm going to end today with a testimony that I want you to watch. Of a young lady who did just this. Came to Jesus with her shame. And I want you to see, this isn't a story that just takes place in the Bible, but this is a story that God repeats over and over again. And I want you to see what restoration looks like. And all she did was she cried out to Jesus and said, if you're real, help me. I don't want to carry this anymore. Please watch. Those sound people. We love them. Okay. It was all like heavy, and now it got like, what? There is? Okay. Okay. Is it going to work, Jeremy, or no? You want to go talk to him, Steve? Okay, well. Should we move on? Oh, there it is.
Growing up, I just remember my dad just raging. I'd come home and my dad would be really angry, stressed out, and I really took it personal. And I think that I thought to myself that I must be unlovable. High school, noticed that the boys were paying attention to me, and since I wasn't getting any attention from my dad, I gravitated toward any compliment, any pass that was made at me. I met this boy in school that stole my heart. He told me if I slept with him, we'd get married, we'd make a life together, we'd have babies. And I completely took my entire heart and gave it to this boy. And when I found out that he was sleeping with several of my best girlfriends, it was such a shock to me. Left high school, heartbroken, moved out of my parents' home. The day after I graduated, I remember waving at my mom when I was 18 and my dad, and in the back of the car, knowing I'd never come back because I was done. I got out into the beautiful city of Minneapolis, tried to find a way to go to college, but I had to work 3 jobs to have my own place and buy a car. And I found like a new thing inside of me that if I had nice clothes, if I went out to the clubs, I could meet different men that liked me, and maybe I could meet a rich guy that would sweep me off my feet and take care of me like a prince would. And so my girlfriend and I started going out to the nightclubs, and we had a fake ID. And one night we walked in. These men walked up to us at the bar and bought us drinks, Rolex watches, designer clothes. I looked at my girlfriend. These guys have money. My girlfriend starts to like one of the men. I told my girlfriend, get that guy's money. And I think what this really was building inside me was this vendetta, this deep-seated, rooted unforgiveness towards my dad, towards that boy in school, and I just wanted revenge. I was going to prove that I could make it in my life, and money was going to be the answer. My girlfriend takes off with this guy, goes to Hawaii. I'm working my 3 jobs. She calls me up and says, listen, I am on the beach. I'm in a drop-top Corvette, and I'm on my cell phone, and you need to come out here. And even though I didn't have the guts to ask her, you know, what are you doing? I just kind of went with it. It was like an automatic walking into a dark doorway that I knew something wasn't right. But the lure of the possibility of having nice things and finally having money that I never had growing up, finally being someone important, overrode all those feelings of any caution, and it blew it to the wind. And I went to Hawaii that very week, took a vacation from my jobs. And the first night that I was on Waikiki Beach, I actually sold myself with my girlfriend to some Japanese clients, and I became a prostitute. It's kind of like I had this ring that I put on and I couldn't take it off. No longer could $3.47 an hour cut it. Once I found out that I could make hundreds, if not thousands of dollars, selling myself $500 an hour with no attachment, no relationship, $1,000 an hour. Now it was $2,000 an hour. It gave me this immense power. And if he wanted me for the night, that was $10,000. A few months later, I started dancing. And one day I was on the stage, and this man walks in, puts this couple $100 fan of money at my feet. And I danced just for him. And I let him know that I was actually prostituting my body. I was actually selling myself to make extra ends meet. He looked at me and said, "You are so intelligent. I really like you. In fact, I think I'm falling in love with you." He gave me everything that I needed to hear from my dad. And I decided that I wanted to move to Las Vegas. I got off the plane, and that night I went on a couple calls. I brought home a nice wad of money. My boyfriend was there, and he told me to break myself. "What did you say to me?" He said, "Break yourself. And that means give me all your money, dump your purse out on my lap." And I wasn't having it. And he proceeded to take me out by my hair. He choked me. He threw me on the porch, on my knees, and he started kicking me. "This is pimpin', B. I'm just choking on my own blood. You're gonna work for me." Punching me in my face. Time it is, but what time it is now is you're gonna pay me. My nose broke, my ribs broke. It was like I was looking at the devil. The prince turned dark. And if you try to leave, I'll kill you. That night, it's like I died inside. And the next 5 years of my life, I was with a pimp. Every time he hit me and choked me and raped me or put guns to my head, made me do things I never wanted to do, I just did it because I loved him and because out of fear, because I knew if I didn't, that I would not live to see another day. And even though I got away from him, everything you give, you leave. The money, the cars, the houses, all behind, because when you leave a pimp, you leave with nothing. I started stacking my money again, but the money wasn't the same. I came down with cancer, and a couple years later, lost all my hair, had chemotherapy, had Hodgkin's lymphoma. I started taking painkillers for my bone pain and my marrow, and I got addicted to painkillers, and that led into cocaine. I was going on calls bald with wigs because I had lost all my hair from chemotherapy. And I had clients calling me a cancer bee. I'm staying in these seedy motels, and I remember laying there in my bed looking in the mirror at myself, thinking that God was angry with me. I would get in the shower and I would scrub my body, and I would think, I'll never, ever be clean. I started freebasing cocaine, and one night, I just decided that I was just gonna get higher than I could, than I've ever been before, because I just wanted to erase all the pain of the cancer, the pain of my uncle, my sister, and my grandpa dying within 3 months of each other, the pain of losing all those years with my family up in the Midwest, the pain of losing all my friends, losing my cars, losing everything I had ever made. I took the hit of that coke, and I fell back. I went completely blind. It's like the whole room, the light that was on in that room turned dark. And I remember laying there, and I felt like this demonic presence just come over me, that I was completely alone, and I got really, really scared, and I just instinctively knew. I knew that I was at death's door. I was in this dark, dark cave, and I knew it was over. And I saw my family. I saw my funeral. And I was in the coffin. And everybody was crying, and they were wiping their faces, and they were saying, she was just a prostitute. That's when I said, Jesus, please save me. I don't know if you're real, but I don't want to die. The ambulance came, and the doctor came up to me and he grabbed my hand. And he said, you are lucky to be alive. You have so much drugs in your system, little lady. You should be dead. God must be with you. And I knew that Jesus heard my prayer. And I laid there, and I had this peace come over me that was nothing like I'd ever felt in my entire life. And I knew God gave me a second chance. I got better, and I started reading my Bible. I recovered and was afraid to go to church. I'm not an ex-prostitute. Do I think if I walk in church, people are gonna look at me and really love me? But I walked in that church and people embraced me. And God just really started doing that inner healing, and the Holy Spirit was just like speaking to me, telling me that I was beautiful, and that I was chosen, and that I was set apart, and that I was sanctified, and I was a holy vessel for Him. I started to stand on Jesus' words, that I'm whole, that I'm healed, that I'm pure, that I'm a virgin in Him. And that gives me peace. I remember I was vacuuming my house one day, and the Lord said to me, He said, Annie, I want you to go back down to that strip, and I want you to tell the girls that are in slavery that I love them. And so that's what I'm called to do, to simply tell them, God loves you. No matter where you've been, no matter what you've done, no matter how deep, how dirty you feel, that there's redemption. You are white as snow when you accept Him into your heart.
See, to me, and what's amazing is that story is not an isolated story. That's exactly how God responds to every one of us. When we come to Him in our desperation, we come to Him in our brokenness, we come to Him in our shame, and He responds back with love and with mercy, with grace, with healing, with restoration. And it's easy sometimes too, church, to sit back and like hear that and be like, well, that's not me. I've been a Christian for so many years. But do you realize the reason we need to hear these stories, the reason we need to understand the story we read this morning, it is absolutely your responsibility to respond to a world the same way Jesus did. If you are a follower of Jesus, He calls you His ambassador. An ambassador goes to another country to represent the country where they're from. And it just breaks my heart that for too long the church has misrepresented this Jesus that we love. Because if we represented Him the right way, the world would have a hard time turning away from Him. And so this morning, I hope you would say yes you would share your shame with him this morning. You would lay your stuff before him, and you would allow him the opportunity to respond back to you with grace, and with love and restoration and forgiveness. I just want to pray. God, right now, I lift up any person in this room that's carrying shame. Maybe shame of some of the things they've done, shame of situations that their choices have led to. I pray for those that carry the shame of the things that have been done to them. I'm asking this morning, God, that you would give them the strength and the courage to come to you, to reach out and to touch your robe. Just like that woman in the story, she says, if I could just get close to Jesus, I'll be healed. I won't carry this anymore. I won't have to suffer the way I did. I pray that we see that this morning, that spiritually, if we'll just get close to you, we can be healed. We don't have to carry the guilt and the condemnation and the weight of all this stuff we've carried for way too long. And God, I pray for courage this morning. It's a scary thing to expose ourselves, to come clean with all of our stuff, but it's so healing. It is so restorative to bring that before you and to allow that shame, that hurt to be met with love and acceptance and forgiveness and restoration. And I pray that even now, as people are just saying, Jesus, I need you. Jesus, right here, this place, this thing I did, this choice I made that I wish I could take back. I have wished thousands and thousands of times over. I wish I could do it over. I need you. I need you to heal me. I need you to restore me. I need you to forgive me. God, I pray you would do that this morning. I pray, God, restoration would begin to touch people's hearts and lives. Would you stand? We're going to go back, sing a song. It's my hope this morning that you would feel and receive this restoration. Reach out to Jesus. And real talk, like, it's cool in church. Like, it's like, oh, that was so good. That was so emotional. Like, I felt it. And then Monday comes and you wake up and you feel like the same dude. You feel like the same girl. Sometimes you got to keep reaching out to him. You understand what I'm saying? Sometimes I got to be persistent in chasing after him because eventually I'm going to get it up here. It's happened already in here. He's already done what he said he would do, but I got to retrain my mind to stop thinking like the person I used to be and start thinking like the person he's created me to be. So I'm going to tell you to keep chasing after him. Even if you feel it right now and then you wake up tomorrow and you're like, it's gone. It's not gone. You just have an enemy that he has used that most of your life to keep you locked up. And he doesn't want to see you get free because he understands your potential. If you get free, you're going to cause problems for him. Now, I'm just here to serve notice to the devil today. I'm free. The prison door is wide open and I'm walking out. And I know you're going to remind me of all my mistakes. And you can remind all you want. It ain't about my performance. It's about my position. I'm a son and I'm a daughter. I belong. There's nothing you can do to take that from me. I want you to walk out of this place today with that mindset. I want you to wake up tomorrow morning when the devil comes chirping with that mindset. The vultures, right, from Father's Day. Just remind him, I'm free, man. I'm free. You can talk all you want. You're the one who's locked up. You're limited. I have no limits anymore. The Bible says when the Son set free, now therefore is free indeed. I pray every person in this room will experience the fullness of that. We're going to go back into a time of worship. Worship like some free people today.